Yeah, so nylon strings. Generally, the strings for a banjo are similar to a set for a guitar, namely the top 4 strings of a guitar, with the top string, the first string, being repeated for the 5th string, which is the thumb string, the open string. So you kind of need 2 first strings, a 2nd, 3rd and 4th. But guitar strings, nylon strings, the ones that don't have the metal windings anyway, the higher ones, are essentially fishing line. They make far more of this sort of stuff for fishing line, sea fishing, fishing nets, way more for that purpose than they ever do for guitar strings that are only replaced once or twice a year or so, or once or twice a lifetime in my case, until now. If you're the sort of person who has a number of instruments, it's well worth buying some fishing line of the appropriate gauge, especially the thin ones, because they're the ones you're always breaking. I've got 2 main sources of nylon strings: fishing line. At the gauge you need for a banjo, it's almost certainly going to be sea fishing line, which means you're probably going to have to buy an awful lot of it. But it'll last. You can only buy it the once. Anything thicker than that, and it's almost certainly going to be strimmer line. In the long run, it'll save you money. You haven't got to send off for them or go off shopping. You've got your own private supply, and you've got so much that you can change them as often as you like. So it's a bonus. And the other bonus, if you have the appropriate gauge to replace the 4th string, the 4th string, unless you're using the Nile gut strings or something similar, is usually a guitar string, and therefore it's got those windings on it. And on a banjo, that's the only one that does. So it sounds quite different from the other 3. And I don't think that's especially traditional. Originally, it would have been gut, some sort of animal gut. Sheep, probably, or goat or something. Calf, perhaps. But in any event, it would have been gut, and that's what nylon most closely represents. Yeah, so you don't have that rasping that you have when you're moving along the string, or it clattering against the frets if you got them. I'd much rather have another nylon one, another monofilament nylon one, like the other 3, so that it sounds like all the other strings and not completely different. And so there's another good reason for buying some fishing line. Plus they come in these really pretty colours. Pick and mix. But you can do the same with the metal strings as well, if you find out the right gauge of metal you need. Anyway, the metal strings, I intend to do a video on that, because you can keep the ball ends from the strings you had and use them again to create new strings with your own wire. So I'm going to do a separate video on that to demonstrate my method sometime in the future when I'm restringing a metal strung instrument. And then the only other thing I wanted to say, if one wanted to make a loop on the end of your string, if your banjo, say, had the hooks on it that you need to have a loop to hook over, then the best way to do it by far is just to take the string and then keep a firm hold of it, like that, and then just make the knot in that. I hope you can see what I'm doing. What you can do is wrap it around your finger and do it. I'm going to try and do it without doing that, so you might be able to see what I'm doing. And then I just tuck the loop through that bit there, pull it tight, and there you go, there's your loop. I mean, obviously you can make yours a little smaller. I've decided that mine is only this big for demonstration purposes, so that you can see it from there. Obviously I'd make a much smaller, neater loop if I were doing it for real. But that really is as strong as it needs to be, that won't slip. Really simple, really easy, you don't need any fancy knots. And that's actually not a bad way of making a knot if you're just feeding it through a hole. If you don't mind a bit of a loop hanging out, that's as good a way as any. yeah, so particularly if you have a number of instruments, well worthwhile getting the relevant gauges to replace the 1st and 5th strings, and I'd highly recommend getting the right gauge for the 4th string so that it doesn't rasp about the place in a way that none of the others do. I hope this was helpful. I'm going to put a chart, or I might have already done so, for the relative gauges according to the string that you're using, but it is only a suggestion. I found that worked for me. It's certainly somewhere in the field, but you might find that you prefer a thinner or thicker gauge, and so it's only a recommendation. That's it. Hope it helped. See you again soon.